Welcome back everybody, Dan here for Sim Racing Source, and thanks so much for checking out this review. Last year I partnered up with SimXperience and they sent me on an Accuforce Pro V2 to test out and put through its paces. Initially I made several videos when I first got it, but I wanted to truly drive it long term before I gave you my complete thoughts and did a full review. When there's this much money on the table, you have to invest a substantial amount of time testing before you can honestly recommend or not recommend a product. Over the last year, I've extensively tested and used this Accuforce as my primary racing wheel, and now I'm finally at a point where I can give you a complete and informed review. I've learned a lot about this wheel over the last year, and now I'm going to tell you the good stuff, the not so good stuff, and whether or not I recommend this as a good buy if you're in the market for a direct drive wheel. There are two things I need to point out first before we get into this review. First, I will be discussing a lot of information in this review, so grab a drink and find a comfortable seat because this will likely take some time to get through all the important information that you need to know. If you're going to spend this much money on a sim racing product based on my suggestion, I want to make sure you are as informed as possible. Second, as of the time of this review, this is the only direct drive wheel that I have any experience with. So I want it to be very clear that in this review I will be making no attempt to directly compare the performance of the Accuforce with any other direct drive wheel available, since I have no personal experience with any of the others. My goal for this review is to do my best to inform you of whether or not I believe the Accuforce V2 is a good value based on the features that it offers. In the past year, two new direct drive wheels have hit the market and they have been causing a lot of buzz in the sim racing community. The Fanatic Podium Series and the SemiCube SC2 were both released with huge speculation that they were going to be two of the best direct drive wheels available. And while I've heard a few claims of issues from both sides, the majority of what I've heard is that they both have mostly lived up to those expectations. Now, while I am very excited that more manufacturers are jumping onto the direct drive bandwagon, I also want to remind you that just because newer products are available doesn't automatically mean the older product is no longer a good one. My point here is that if you are in the market for a direct drive wheel, don't overlook the Accuforce simply because there are newer options available. In my opinion, the Accuforce still has a strong argument for why it is one of the best, if not the best deal out of all the direct drive wheels currently available. Now, I know most people watching this video probably already know what a direct drive wheel is, but I would be doing a disservice to those who don't if I don't give a brief description of the difference between a direct drive wheel and a traditional belt or gear driven wheel. Most sim racing wheels available that have force feedback, direct drive or not, use electric motors to produce those forces. However, traditional consumer style wheels use smaller, more cost efficient electric motors so they can be built to a price that is more affordable. The issue with that is these smaller motors alone can't produce the forces needed to send enough information through the wheel. So manufacturers supplement these motors with internal belt and gear pulley systems. These pulley systems are used to increase the overall forces that these smaller electric motors are able to produce, making these consumer wheels a very cost-efficient way to obtain a racing wheel with a decent amount of force feedback. Unfortunately, these can come with some downsides. One problem is their pulley systems often have issues with slipping, which tend to get worse as the unit heats up over extended use. Another issue is they tend to be less reliable due to the amount of internal plastic components used to make up their pulley systems. They also have the potential to get noisy and feel a little loose over time as components inside start to wear down. Direct drive wheels, on the other hand, use larger and much stronger electric motors. These motors are so strong that it alleviates the need for any additional pulley systems to increase the overall strength. Another benefit is that a racing wheel can be mounted directly to the shaft of the electric motors. There are no forces lost through the pulley system. Also, the lack of additional components inside mean they are much more reliable and far less likely to have things wear down over time. So hopefully that gives you some insight on the difference between the two. With that said, I do want to mention real quick that there are non-direct drive wheels available that are fantastic and have proven to be great wheels. In fact, I still have a Thrustmaster TSPC that I highly recommend if you are in the market for a sub $500 wheel. So if you're not able to afford a direct drive wheel, don't worry, there are still great options available for you to purchase and enjoy sim racing. I hope you will stick around and watch the entire review, but I'm not going to beat around the bush here and keep you waiting. Right off the bat, here is my argument for why I believe that this is one of the best options when it comes to purchasing a direct drive wheel. In short, the Accuforce Pro V2 kit is the best package available for the money, and package being the key word here. It's pretty much as simple as that. Most direct drive wheelbases alone cost well over $1,000, and once you start adding in everything else you need to go along with those wheelbases, that price can quickly skyrocket out of control. The Accuforce, however, is $999, and that includes everything you need. You unpack it, mount it on your rig, install the software, and that is it. No additional money is required to be spent. The SimXperience Pro 2, for example, will cost you about $1,300 just for the wheelbase. Then you have to source a wheel rim, a wheel button box, some kind of shifter, and the list goes on of additional items needed. These items will vary in price, but at a minimum plan on spending about $400 to $500, and realistically it's probably going to be much more than that. So you can see how your total can easily double the price of the Accuforce. Also, keep in mind that whatever direct drive wheel you go with, including the Accuforce, you will still need a set of pedals as well as a sim rig that is strong enough to handle the weight and power of a direct drive wheel. Moving to a direct drive wheel is not a cheap venture, so it's important to save money anywhere you can, hence all the more reason to go with the Accuforce. Now, elephant in the room here. Yes, I am aware that there are direct drive wheels available that are stronger than the Accuforce, and I'll go further into those details later. But in my case, I haven't had the need to run the Accuforce over 50% of its overall strength. So personally, anything above that would just be overkill and money not worth spending in my personal opinion. In short, you're not going to be disappointed with the performance of the Accuforce, and I believe the money saved is all the more reason to go with it instead of one of the others. So here's exactly what's included in the Accuforce Pro V2 kit. In the package, you get the wheelbase itself, a standalone control box, an adjustable button box with paddle shifters, a quick release system, a 320mm round steering wheel, the Sim Commander software, and all the necessary cables and mounting accessories that are required. I'll go further into details about each one of these items later on in the review, but first I want to discuss the general performance of the Accuforce. So obviously the main reason someone would be interested in a direct drive wheel is because of the additional performance they offer over a traditional belt or gear driven wheel. Direct drive wheels as a whole offer much more strength, and more importantly they are capable of producing much finer details in the force feedback. There's no exception here with the Accuforce. According to the SimXperience website, the V2 produces 13 Newton meters of sustained torque with a 0% loss due to heat fade. I will also note that the Quick Start Guide references forces up to 16 Newton meters, so it seems the Accuforce is capable of producing forces beyond the stated 13 Newton meters, but it may not be able to maintain those forces continuously for an extended period of time. Unfortunately, my hands did not come equipped with tools to measure power outputs precisely, so I'm not going to attempt to confirm nor deny those exact figures. But what I can tell you is, from my personal use, the Accuforce has offered much more power than I could honestly ever need. As I said earlier, in most cases, I have had the overall forces inside Sim Commander set to around 50%, and for some sims I use even less than that. I've personally used many high-end consumer wheels, including the Thrustmaster TSPC and the Fanatic Club Sport V2.5, and those do not even come close to the performance of the Accuforce. For a reference, the TSPC peaks out at around 6 Newton meters of torque. That's less than half the minimum SimXperience claims the Accuforce has, and something tells me they are underrating those power numbers a little bit. Now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to say the TSPC or the Club Sport are bad wheels. On the contrary, both of those are fantastic wheels, but the Accuforce is just that much better. If you've used the TSPC or the Club Sport and you thought those were strong, you'll simply be blown away by the performance of the Accuforce. Now, as I mentioned before, there are other direct drive wheels available that produce more overall forces than the V2, but I'm not so sure that extra power is necessary, and I definitely don't think it warrants the huge price increase. At some point, you reach a place where you are paying for power you will likely never use. Now, that will have to be up to you to decide if it's worth it or not. Just know that the Accuforce will not leave you wishing you had more power, because it has more than plenty. So the question you have to ask yourself is it worth spending all that extra money for a wheel with additional power you may not even use? Well, again, that's going to be up for you to decide for yourself, but personally, I say no. For me, the V2 offers way more power than I could ever possibly use. So with the general performance out of the way, let's start diving into the individual components that come with the Pro Kit. I'll start with the most important one, the wheelbase itself. Along with performing well, SimXperience also wanted their wheelbase to stand out and look visually pleasing. Whereas most direct drive wheels are just the electric motor mounted to a rig, SimXperience encased the Accuforce motor inside a beautiful yet industrial looking black powder coated case. The shaft of the electric motor comes through a carbon fiber plate on the front. On the front you will also find a plug for the included RJ11 cable that powers and connects the button box to the wheelbase. More on that later. On the sides there are 3D chrome SimXperience logos that give the wheelbase a nice premium look. The wheelbase is a very heavy unit. I'm guessing it weighs in around 15 to 20 pounds, so you will certainly need a very stable racing rig to manage the weight and the torque of the wheelbase. On the back there is a large cable that runs from the wheelbase itself over to the control box. At the control box the cable splits into two connectors, one small and one large, which both plug directly into the wheel control box. These provide the power and the data transfer for the wheelbase. Out front there is a large black machined aluminum hub with two different sets of standard bolt patterns which make the V2 compatible with pretty much any aftermarket racing wheel or quick release system on the market. Out of the box it comes with the included Accuforce quick release system installed on the hub, but of course you can change it out for a different quick release or just bolt a wheel directly to the hub if that's what you prefer to do. Also there's a large set screw on the side of the hub that can be used to remove the hub entirely if you needed to do that for some reason. And then of course inside the case you find the heart of the Accuforce. The Accuforce utilizes a stepper style motor as opposed to a servo style motor. Now I am not an electrical engineer, so I am not going to attempt to argue to you which one of those is better or more efficient for a direct drive wheel application. But what I can say is there are loads of forum posts and articles claiming why each one could potentially be better for various reasons. To save my own sanity though, I'm just going to let you guys look into that further if you really want to know about it, but just be forewarned, you will likely be looking through pages upon pages of information, and when you're done, you still may not be sure which one is better. Next on the list is the control box, or what I refer to as the power box. I call this the power box because inside it houses the wheel's power supply unit, as well as various other electrical components. Two USB cables leave the control box and head off to your PC. One is the main connection for your wheelbase, and the other is basically a hub point for the Accuforce button box to connect to your PC. So instead of the button box having a long cable that runs straight to the PC, this setup allows for a much shorter cable to leave the button box and plug directly into the wheelbase itself. On a small separate note, I do wish they would have incorporated the use of a standard USB style connection onto the front of the wheelbase so we could directly plug in any aftermarket wheel or button box that uses a USB style connection. Most of them do, and as far as I'm aware, the Accuforce button box is the only one that utilizes a RJ11 style connection. Lastly, back to the power box, there is a standard power cable with an on-off switch in line to power the wheelbase on and off. At this point, I will mention that every time you turn on the wheelbase, it does calibrate itself, spinning the hub rapidly back and forth. This is not really that different from how most belt-driven wheels work, except in this case there is that cable that could potentially get caught and break during calibration. Therefore, it is always best practice to remove the wheel and set it down before powering on the wheelbase. Next thing up in the Pro package is the quick release. I love the solution that SimXperience uses on the V2. It's awesome because it's the exact same style 70mm quick release system used in many real-world track cars as well as some race cars. This gives nearly endless possibilities of what wheel can be mounted to the Accuforce due to the vast amount of real-world steering wheels using this standard 70mm bolt pattern. Whether you want a very expensive high-end formula rim or an extremely cheap OMP knockoff, it can easily be adapted to the Accuforce quick release system. Also, it is a true quick release system. It literally is a one-click on and off solution that can be changed out extremely fast. This is especially handy since you really should remove the wheel every time you turn the wheelbase on. So now I'll move on to the included button box. The Accuforce button box is designed with the included rim in mind, but it can also be adjusted to fit many different style and shaped rims. The bottom buttons are set in a fixed position, but the top two sections can rotate upward to accommodate wheels with a larger center spoke design. It has a total of 13 buttons, including one working horn button in the center. I wouldn't call it a lot of buttons, but it's certainly adequate enough. On the back, you'll find two carbon fiber shift paddles. They work just fine, but they do lack that satisfying click that some other options out there have. I've never had an instance where it didn't register an input when I pulled on either paddle, or for that matter, any of the buttons on the button box. The upside is that the paddles are highly adjustable and you can easily increase or decrease the throw distance of each paddle as well as the engagement points. Overall, it's a pretty solid button box with a lot of adjustability, so I'm glad it's included in the package. Of course, the button box does you no good if there isn't a wheel attached to it. So let's talk about the wheel that comes included with the Pro Kit. It's an unbranded, large, round wheel that is very similar to a few rims offered by OMP and Sparco. It comes in at a healthy 320 millimeters or roughly 12.5 inches and is wrapped in thick padding and covered with Alcantara. Alcantara and suede are pretty commonly seen on racing wheels, but my personal preference would be leather simply for long-term durability. That being said, the Accuforce steering wheel has held up very well with only minimal wear on the edges around the 10 and 2 marks. This kind of wear is to be expected on any suede or Alcantara steering wheels that are being put under heavy use for a long period of time. Since it's completely round, it's a very versatile wheel and can be used for any racing discipline. Of course, as time progresses, you will likely want to get additional rims for specific style cars, such as Formula or GT racing cars, but the Accuforce rim will easily work for you until that time comes. Now I'm going to spend some time talking about the Sim Commander software. For the purpose of this review, I'm only going to discuss sections of Sim Commander that pertain directly to the Accuforce, but I do want to point out that Sim Commander is a very powerful tool that does much more than just control the Accuforce wheel. If I'm honest, at first glance, Sim Commander does look quite overwhelming. When I first roamed my way around the menus, it seemed to be tabs upon tabs of endless things that you can change and adjust. But after I kind of figured out my way around the menu system, it pretty quickly became quite intuitive and started to actually make a lot of sense. It's kind of like with anything else, when you first start using it, there will be a bit of a learning curve, but if you just keep messing with it, eventually you'll figure it all out. For this review, I'm going to focus on the main two ways that Sim Commander control the Accuforce wheel. For the most part, there will be two types of Accuforce users. The first type are people who don't want to fiddle around and mess with a bunch of settings. They just want to hop into a sim and race as quickly as possible. The other type is going to be people who prefer to tinker and tweak their force feedback settings to precisely how they want them to feel. Luckily, Sim Commander accommodates both of these types of users extremely well. I've heard a lot of people say that one of the reasons why they don't want to move to a direct drive wheel is because they are afraid it requires a lot of initial work to get the wheel to feel right. Now, while you can spend as much time as you want dialing in your force feedback, this is absolutely not something that is required to enjoy the Accuforce. So let's talk about the easier and quicker way to set up and use the Accuforce inside Sim Commander. This method will bypass the need for profiles and it will send the game force feedback directly to the Accuforce, similar to the way it would for any other consumer force feedback wheel. When you first install Sim Commander, it will automatically detect the sims that you have on your selected drive and create game profiles for each one of them. For this method though, you will completely ignore these profiles. Inside the control center of Sim Commander, there are three general tabs. They are Manage Sim Setup Buttons, aka Profiles, Visual Lap Analyzer, and a Settings tab. Inside the Settings tab, there are many options, but the important one here is the Sim Device Manager tab. Inside this, you will find various settings for all of the SimXperience telemetry devices, such as motion platforms and SimVibe. If you click on the Accuforce steering tab, it brings up what I refer to as the main control panel for the wheel. The reason I call this the main control panel is because it is very similar to the control panels that you will be familiar with if you have used any Thrustmaster or Fanatic wheels in the past. You will find the very basic settings inside there for things like overall intensity, degrees of rotation, smoothing, and the other typical settings you find inside wheel control panels. You simply set these settings to your preferences, save them, and then close completely out of Sim Commander. Then you just launch any sim like you normally would, map your wheel, and adjust the force feedback settings in game. It's exactly the same way as any other wheel. This is by far the simplest method to use the Accuforce. Now, if you are on the other side of the fence and you prefer to have full adjustability over the force feedback, or you want to take advantage of SimXperience's Steering Force Foundation, you will have to make use of custom game profiles. But before I go through that process, I want to quickly explain what Steering Feedback Foundation is. Steering Feedback Foundation is a type of force feedback exclusive to the Accuforce, and it takes the sim's raw telemetry data and produces a force feedback based on that data alone. This will completely ignore any canned effects or filters that the sim may apply to the in-game force feedback. This allows Sim Commander to produce raw physics-based force feedback, and it's pretty fantastic. This is the force feedback that I typically use. Steering Feedback Foundation can be used alone, or it can be mixed with the in-game force feedback, as well as many other effects that are available inside the game profile. Now, I'm not going to go too far in detail on these in this video, as the options are pretty much endless, but I will explain quickly how to find and use these settings. So to take advantage of this, you will need to use a game profile, as I said before. In order for a game profile to be active while you're in the sim, you have to launch the game through the Sim Commander software instead of through Steam or a desktop icon like you typically would. To get to these adjustments and effect settings, you will need to go back into your SimXperience Control Center, but this time you will stay inside the Manage Sim Setup Buttons tab. On the left in a column, you will see all the default profiles that Sim Commander created, as well as any additional profiles that you have created yourself. If you click on any of these profiles, it will open up the main window for that particular sim. You will see a lot of tabs at the top, but the one we are concerned with here is the Output Mixer tab. When you click on that tab, you will only see one row called the Accuforce Steering Wheel. It will contain a smoothing slider and an intensity slider. I was a little confused by this at first because I couldn't find all the other settings that I knew you could adjust. For whatever reason, and there's nothing on the page that tells you to do this, you have to click inside the box to open up the other adjustable options. Once you do that, you will see a lot of other sliders appear that can be turned on or off, and the intensities can be adjusted for each. You will also now see a device settings tab, which will look identical to the control panel from before, but keep in mind that changing these settings here will only apply to this profile and will have no effects on the main control panel settings we talked about earlier. You will have to adjust these settings for each profile individually, as none of them have any association or effect on each other. Now, this obviously gets way more detailed than what I've explained here, but that would require a whole video in itself to explain every single little thing that goes along with setting up these individual profiles. The last thing I want to mention dealing with Sim Commander before I move on to the next topic is the auto tuning function. While it's not a requirement to use, it is a great way to get a good starting point when creating profiles. Basically, it will have you run a few laps in your selected sim as it records your telemetry data in the background. Then it will make some initial adjustments to the force feedback settings based on peaks, clipping, and other various data. Then from there, you can add in effects and make adjustments to fine-tune your preferred force feedback settings. So overall, while Sim Commander may seem a little clunky to begin with, it's actually a fantastic tool for getting your Accuforce setup exactly to your liking. Now I want to discuss a fantastic resource for the Accuforce that is not talked about much, but it is invaluable if you are an owner of one of these wheels. That is the Accuforce Owners Club and Forum. Once you become an owner of the Accuforce, you automatically become a member of the Accuforce Owners Club. And this is far more than a place to go and brag that you are now an Accuforce owner. Inside the forum, you will find tons of valuable information and resources. If you're having trouble getting a solid profile for a particular game, you will certainly find one that someone has already built in the Owners Club. You will also find many things like list of confirmed wheels that bolt directly to the Accuforce button box without any modification, and other helpful topics. There's a really nice customer support section as well as a peer-to-peer support section. One of the really great things about the Accuforce not being the newest direct drive wheel available is that there is endless amounts of information out there, and the Owners Club is one of the best places to find that information. So up until this point, you've probably noticed that I have been overwhelmingly positive throughout this review, and that's because my experience with the Accuforce over the last year has been just that, really positive. But just as with anything else, nothing is perfect, and there are definitely a few critiques that I have about the Accuforce. The first thing that I want to mention is a slight rebuttal from my initial impressions video. In that video, I made a pretty big deal about the fact that there is the need for the coiled cable that runs from the wheelbase to the button box. And while that is still true and a little bit annoying, what I failed to address the first time is the fact that pretty much every other direct drive wheel has that same issue. So while it is a bit of a pain to deal with that dangling cord, it shouldn't be something you factor in when deciding which wheel to buy, since they pretty much all have that issue. Also, once I figured out the best way to route the cable, it pretty much became a non-issue for me. The next issue I think could be addressed with some minor design changes to the wheelbase's case, and it has to do with the mounting areas. The mounting holes themselves are fine, but the limited area you have to reach them causes some challenges when trying to mount the wheelbase to a rig. The access area to the mounting holes are very small and awkward, so it's really hard to get tools in there to tighten the bolts down properly. On my rig, I secured my wheelbase down with Allen bolts, and it was near impossible to get an Allen wrench inside the access area to tighten the bolts down, especially without damaging the finish on the wheelbase case. So I ended up mounting mine with the bolts going up through the bottom and secured them with nuts on the top with a small socket wrench, and even then it was very difficult to get the socket wrench in there without damaging the wheelbase. It's not a huge deal, but you really don't want to spend that much money on an item and then accidentally damage it during installation. So it would be nice to see a slight adjustment made there. For the most part, the Accuforce wheelbase is very quiet. On average, it's as quiet or possibly even quieter than any of the consumer wheels that I've used in the past. But there are certain occasions where it is excessively noisy. There are certain sims that produce very harsh canned effects through the force feedback, and those effects can come through as loud grinding noises. Actually, when I first experienced it, I thought I was having electrical interference, but after lots of testing and some research, I realized this was not the case. Assetto Corsa is a great example of this. If you run Assetto Corsa without a game profile, this will certainly be the case for you. You can reduce the noise, but you have to nearly max out smoothing to do so. Now, this is not really the fault of the Accuforce. This really just comes down to how SimCommander interprets the harsh canned effects and then sends them to the wheelbase. So don't be alarmed if you hear some strange noises on occasion, just turn up the smoothing until it goes away. I've also seen people complaining of similar issues with other direct drive wheels, so I think that it's a common issue for most of these high-end direct drive wheels. My last negative, and my only actual real complaint about the Accuforce, is the fan inside the control box. I also addressed this in my first look video, and my feelings have not changed. The fan in the control box is annoyingly loud. The control box houses a standard Meanwell power supply unit similar to the ones found inside all kind of electrical components. They are very common and they are very reliable. But for whatever reason, I can only assume the cost, the model they chose to use inside the V2's control box has an obnoxiously loud fan. It's a variable speed fan, and even at its slowest speed, it's very loud. I did some research thinking that maybe mine just had a bad fan, but that turned out not to be the case. It turns out in the original Accuforce they used a power supply with a much quieter fan, but for some reason they switched to this one in the V2. It's a pretty common complaint amongst V2 owners, so it appears I'm not alone with this opinion. Now, I don't like to dwell on particularly negative things, but this should really be addressed by SimXperience. There have been a lot of complaints about this. Even if it drove the cost up slightly, it would still be worth it to have a power supply with a quieter fan. As far as I know, they are still shipping the current V2 with the same power supply that I have, so you will likely have the same issue. Now, even with that said, this is not really a deal breaker for me. After all, it is pretty easy and inexpensive to swap in a quieter fan. Honestly, I already have a replacement fan in studio ready to install. Just be aware if you choose to go that same route, you will likely void your warranty. It would just be nice if SimXperience would fix the issue on their end to begin with, so no one had to worry about it. I do have to admit though, it is only noticeable when you are not in sim. When you're on track and you have game audio coming through your headphones or your speakers, you probably won't hear the fan at all. But when you're in between races or just messing around, waiting for the next race to start, it will be very noticeable, and for me, it's pretty damn annoying. So that sums up all the negative items that I have found with the Accuforce over the last year. All in all, I would call each one of these items pretty minor, and none of them affect how well the Accuforce performs. So with that said, let's move on to my final thoughts. By now, it should come as no surprise that I absolutely recommend the Accuforce Pro V2 to anyone looking to upgrade into the direct drive market. It's not going to make you any faster, but it will absolutely increase your immersion level and fun factor while sim racing. Again, I have to mention that there are certainly other direct drive wheels available that have a higher overall power output, but none of them can match the value that the Accuforce offers at its price. And none of them come with software anywhere near as powerful as the Sim Commander software that comes with the Accuforce Pro. If there is any reason at all that I could honestly say not to go with the Accuforce, it would be if you currently own a lot of Fanatic gear from their ecosystem and you want to continue to use that gear. In that case, it's kind of a no-brainer to purchase a Podium Series wheelbase, but it will be much more expensive, so keep that in mind. Outside of that, though, the Accuforce is the way to go. As I said before, it's simply the best value per dollar for a direct drive wheel. If I ever get my hands on another direct drive wheel, I will gladly make some honest comparisons between the two, but at this point I have absolutely no reason to move to anything else. I'm pretty much set with the Accuforce, and I'm sure you would be as well. So that's going to do it for my Accuforce Pro V2 review. If you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe so you are notified for our future videos and reviews. Thanks so much for watching as always, guys, and I'll talk to you in the next video.